everyone, it's Keely here for Soy and Shea, and thank you so much for joining me for today's video. In the previous video I was showing how I was creating some promotional items for the business using the xTool M1 laser and blade cutting machine, and on that video I was showing how I was doing these laser engraved bamboo pens, and because I make so many of them I showed that I had this jig, and the idea behind this jig is that I put it into the machine and then I line all of my pens up, put my pattern over the top, and I'm right to go. And then when that round of pens is done, I pick them all up, put the next lot in, and off I go again. So it saves me time in that I don't have to realign my pattern. I know that the etching is going to be in the correct place, so I don't have any which are etched incorrectly, which saves me money and things like that. Now on that video, a lot of people either commented or messaged me privately asking how easy it was to set up these jigs and how much time does it take, and a couple of people asked if I could do a video on it. So that's what we're going to do today. Now the time that it takes to set up these jigs, honestly, it's going to be a long-term saver thing. So even if you are struggling to set it up and it takes you 30 or 40 minutes to get it done, it is well worth it in the long run because it's going to save you so much time when you are doing batches of products later on. But thankfully, since I first created this jig, xTool have put some really awesome upgrades into the software program, which makes creating these jigs super easy, and I'm going to show you how to do that in the software because I have something new that I want to engrave on, and I want to actually do quite a number of these. So I've decided I'm going to create a jig for these, and I'm going to take you along and show you how I do it. Now the first two things we need to do is decide how many holes that we actually want to put into our jig, and we need to measure our items. So let's get our little wooden pencils open, and I am going to grab a ruler and we're going to measure them so we know how big of a hole to cut to lay our pencils into. So let's get into these. Okay, so we are into our pencils. Let's grab one of these ones out, and I'm going to first of all grab my regular ruler, and we're going to line the tip up at 0, and we are 17.5 centimeters long. Now because the tip of my pencil does sit up, I will only cut the length of this to that 17.5. If my item was sitting flush, so say we were doing one of these key rings and this was sitting flush, I would actually give myself just a little bit of extra room, so I'd probably cut it at 17.7 just to make sure that that can actually sit nicely within the hole. But I know because the tip of my pencil is up, when this goes into the hole we can butt this up to the end of the hole and the pencil will sit in there nicely. Now to find out my measurement across, I could do the same thing, you know, working out what it is across there, but because it is so thin, I'm actually going to grab my calipers. If you have got a laser cutting machine, I highly recommend getting a set of calipers. They're relatively cheap from the hardware store. I think I paid less than $30 for these ones, and you get much more accurate measurements. So this one is 7.02 mil. That's how accurate these comes up. I'm actually going to do this so that it is at 9 mil, just to make sure that it sits inside nicely. In fact, 9 might be a bit much. We might take it up to say 8 mil as my cut so it sits in there properly. So we'll say 0.8 centimeters, and now we've got the measurements we need to create the little hole for these to sit in, or the little jig. So let's jump into the creative space and start creating. Okay, so you can see that we are in the xTool creative space and we've got a blank canvas. Now normally when I've done the previous videos you can see a picture of the internal workings of the machine, but today I haven't actually got the machine on, so we haven't taken that photo yet because we can create our jig without actually having the machine turned on and whirring in the background. So we're just going to use our blank canvas here. Now because our pencil is a very simple shape, it is essentially a rectangle. That is what we're going to do. We're not going to bother with the tapered end or anything like that. We're just going to stick to doing a nice simple rectangle for this. So we're going to come into shape And then up at our basic shape, we've got another little arrow. We're going to click on that and we're going to select the rectangle. And the first thing I want to do is take off the aspect ratio for this. So I'm going to click on the little padlock between my width and height. Now my measurements are in millimeters, so I'm going to change my width to 175, and then for the height we're going to change that to 8. So we've got our basic shape for our pencil. Now with my piece of wood that I've got for doing this, I am pretty sure I'm going to be able to get 10 pencils onto my piece of wood, and this is where some of the upgrades in the software have made this extremely easy to create these jigs. What we're going to do is come up to this array and we're going to say grid array. Now depending upon how big the wood you're using and that sort of thing is going to depend upon how many rows and columns that you are going to have. Now I'm only going to be able to do one column, so we're going to take that down to 1. So now you can see we only have one of our lines here, but I do want to do 10 pencils. Now it's only given me 1 mil between each of my pencils, so that's going to be working really close. So I'm actually going to up that. I don't know if you can just see the little security message that's come up on my screen, but we're going to get rid of that. We're going to increase the spacing between these. I'm thinking I'm going to take it up to 3 mil, which will be a nice sort of size, and we'll say okay. And there is the basis for our jig. Now what I am going to do is group them all together. So I've just highlighted them and I'm going to say group. So then it doesn't matter if I click on one or all of them will select. So we're not going to lose that nice even distance between each of the pencils, which will make placing our etching so much easier. Now what I am also going to do is I'm just going to grab my text tool, and where I've got hello, I'm just going to say pencil jig. Let's spell it right. We're going to pop it up there, and I'm actually going to bring the size right down to, let's come up to 20 so we can still see it just a little bit. And I actually might put it on the side here, so we'll turn it 90 degrees and we'll do it so it goes across the top. And I'm going to change that to engrave. You could also put down what your settings are. I actually do have it on the back of my my bamboo jig here, what the actual settings are that I use to do my pens with, but I do know that I'm going to actually do this as a bamboo settings, which are in here already. So we've got that. Now these ones we actually need to tell the machine that we are going to cut them. Now while I've actually got all of this up here, I'm going to come into my 3 mil plywood, and I know that's what we're using, so that's what we're going to cut. So that is basically our jig pretty much created. The only other thing that we need to do is if I put this piece of wood into the machine and it cuts out the holes, I'm going to end up with a pretty big jig here. So what I do want to do is just come back into my shapes. I want to come back into my basic shapes and pick that rectangle again. And what I'm going to do is this time, if it's going to let me, yes it will, I'm just going to drag it up a little bit. I'm going to drag it so it covers all of that. I'm going to turn off my aspect ratio and just bring that back down a little bit like so, and that is looking pretty good. What we might do is highlight it all. Just because my OCD wants me to do this, we are going to line it up so it's all in the middle like so. Now what we're going to do is get that machine turned on. We'll get the snapshot of the wood in the machine to make sure that this is going to fit, and then we're going to cut it out. Okay, so you can hear that we've got the machine on now. We've got our photo on here. Now there's one thing I just remembered that we have not done, and I haven't told the machine that this new line that we've done needs to be cut. And I'm pretty happy with the sort of settings that it comes up at. What I'm going to do is highlight all of this, and I'm going to group it to make sure it doesn't move, and I'm going to drag it down onto my board. Now something I have learned with my particular machine and how it's calibrated is I actually do get the best cuts and etching off the top half of my machine. As it moves down the machine, for some reason I don't always get a good etch or a good cut. And another thing I have learned the hard way as well, to get a really good cut with your plywood, it needs to be perfectly level. If there are any bows or kinks in the wood, you do need to use those clips that come with the honeycomb to hold it down nice and flat. The reason being, it's going to take that sort of initial measurement that we do with our thickness here, and it's going to measure at a certain point, and it's going to treat the thickness of the material the same the whole way. And if something is at a certain height here and it bows down here, the machine doesn't realize it's bowed down, and it doesn't put as much, or it's not as close at this bowed down point, so it doesn't go or cut as much as what it does up here. So you do need to make sure it is nice and flat to get those really good cuts. But now that I've got this in, I've got it all clipped down with my weights, I'm going to set this going to cut so we can actually create our jig for these pencils. Okay, so this is finished. I've just turned it off. I am about to turn everything off actually. We've had a massive storm just roll in, and in like the last little bit as it was just coming around here, the lights started flickering, and I'm thinking, no, please. So I am going to turn everything off in a moment, but I'm going to pull this out. You can see it is cut beautifully because already that has come out. And if we pick a little jig up, just one piece needs to fall out. There is our jig. Okay, so there is our jig ready to go back into the machine with our pencils. You can see if we take one of these, it lines up absolutely beautifully in here, so it's going to make it so much easier to line these up in the machine and get really nice etching every single time. Now, according to the software here, it took 23 minutes and 12 seconds to cut this out. So it's not quick to cut them out, but that 23 minutes of cutting this and probably 5 to 10 minutes of designing it, it is going to save you so much time in the future. Now, we are going to etch on these pencils, but I'm probably going to have to leave it till tomorrow because this is a big storm that is rolling in, and I need to get these computers and other things turned off. So we'll be back shortly and we will do some etching on the pencils. Alright, so it is the next morning. We had an absolute cracker of a storm go through last night. I did think we were going to lose power, so I'm glad I turned this all off. But this morning we're going to get on to doing some etching on these wooden pencils. So what I'm going to do is get this actually set up into the machine so we can see me working on it while it's in the machine but not have the whirring going. So I'll get that picture taken, and I will also get the auto measure done so we know exactly where we're working on this. So as you can see, I have got the jig in the machine and I've lined my pencils up and taken the photo. Now I have put my jig in upside down because, as I've mentioned in my previous video and earlier before, I do find I get those sort of nicer results at the top of my screen, especially with how the camera is placed and things like that. So I've placed it upside down so that we can actually etch on the top of our pencils here, and it just makes it that little bit easier for me. Now we did set it to that 3mm bass ply board, and the thickness I've got with that pencil in there is 9.7, but I am going to take that down to 9, which basically just drops that laser a little bit closer, and I find it gives a better etch, and a lot of people in the group says it works better doing it that way as well. So now that we've got everything in here, we are going to create some text. So I'm going to come to my text button, and as when I was doing the promotional items, these are quite a small area, so the less complicated it is, the nicer the etch you're going to get. So it's come up with its little hello. Oh, we've got 2 there. I must have pushed the button twice. So we're going to take that one. Now, because I do a lot of soap designing with my pencils, I'm going to call this one Creative Juices. You can put any sort of phrase on here, business names. You can even put, say for Christmas, get some colouring in pencils and etch in a child's name. Or even if it's someone you know as an artist, get some watercolour pencils and put their name in. Or if it's someone who really does struggle with colours and knowing how to read them and stuff like that, you can etch the names of the colour pencils into it, like red, blue and things like that. There's so many things that you can do with this to really personalise them. It makes wonderful gifts, and you can then sell them as well. Now I am going to change my font on this one. I'm going to come down. I think I'm going to choose this caveat that's on here. I just want something a little bit more creative. Things seem to be going a little bit slow this morning. No, that was not what we wanted, but I do like it. So let's go with that gorditas. Didn't even know I had that one on there. Now we're actually going to shrink this down in size so we can fit it onto our pencils, and I'm going to rotate it to 270 so it goes up my pencil, and I'm going to roughly place this where I want it to go, and then we're going to zoom in, and I'm going to hold my control and I'm going to roll my mouse button until I come up. Now, as I mentioned on my previous video, the camera is one of the biggest downfalls of the M1, and you do need to learn how to work with it. Because the camera is situated in the center of the machine, when it takes its photo, it's kind of going out in a triangular format, and it kind of distorts where things are. You need to learn how to work with that and to actually use key points within the item that you are etching to get things placed really well. So if we look at our pencils, for example, if we look at this one where I don't have anything on here, you can see where the top ridges are of my pencil. So you know that you need to try and get that placed into this. It may actually not be in the center where you think it are, or where you think it is. So if you actually look at the next pencil across again, it doesn't look centered. So you need to make sure that you're centering it with the lines that you can see, not trying to center it on what you perceive is the center of that image. And this is assuming that you've actually put your pencils in properly as well. Because mine have a flat side, I know that they are flat and are centered in my little board. But let's come back to the first one. So I can see I do need to bring this down to maybe 14 to make sure that it is in the space we've got to etch. I am going to zoom in just a little bit more because I think we might even need to come down to 12 to make sure that that is in the center of our pencil, and that is looking much better. I am going to zoom back out, and I'm going to use my key, or my arrow key, to actually push this up the board. And finally I'm going to change it to engrave. Now I'm pretty happy with the settings that it has automatically for this, so we'll leave it as that. I actually might do a second one that says Creative Juices. We're going to say copy, and I'm going Control C and then Control V to get a copy of this one. You could use your array keys as well, but this way I'm just find it easier today because I'm using my keyboard. So I'm going to make sure that that one is nice and centered. Let's control and copy again onto our next pencil, and for this one we might actually change that one. I'm actually going to put my other business name, Pimp My Soap, and we are going to change it to, oops, to the font that I use for Pimp My Soap. And that font is actually a little bit big because you can see that it's hanging off the sides of the pencil. So I'm going to bring that down and onto the pencil like so. And I'm only going to do one of those just to see if it does work. What else can we do? I'm going to copy and paste that one over here. We're going to line it up onto this pencil. I'll just come across my screen. I'm holding the shift and rolling my mouse button to move it. Let's come up with another, I don't know what to do. I'm just going to go soap design. Alright, so we have got the pencils all done up. I can see that one's not quite lined up there. There we go. Now, if you actually had other colored pencils in your jig here, it'd probably be a lot easier to see what you're doing because there's a color difference between your jig and pencils. But I'm pretty happy with how this has come up. So let's make sure that all of these are for engrave, which they are. Let's get the machine turned on and start getting them done. It has finished. I've turned it off so we don't have the noise in the background. Now these are sort of my testing pencils to see if I've got the right settings and things like that. So let's take a look at them. What I am going to do is I've got my little honeycomb clips in here. I'm actually going to clip my jig in place so that if I do want to run a second set, I can just put my pencils back in. Let's pick them all up, because now I'll actually use these pencils to do lots of different settings on them and give them a try, work out what's best. Alright, so I've got the pencils here. I've had a bit of a look and some have worked out better than others. This is all a matter of trial and error. Very rarely you're going to get things right on the first attempt, but I like to use those pre-settings in here because that gives me a really good starting point, and then I can decide whether I need to have less power, more power, whether I need to increase the lines per minute or per inch and that sort of thing. So this has been a really good starting point, and it's also showing me that one of my fonts really just does not etch well, and that would be the one that I use for Pimp My Soap. Let's see if we can get it to focus on that and not me. Yes, it has. So with the Pimp My Soap one, it actually is quite swirly and patterned, and I think because of the width of this pencil, it is just way too much. So we've had to make it go down too small to be able to very clearly read the logo on this pen. But you know what, I've got a few other sides we can do some practicing on. But I really do think that that particular logo is just no good, because I've been trying to etch on these metal pens and it's a bit hard to see because it's all shiny, but it really does, this particular font really does not etch. So I'm going to scrap that from out of my etching tools. But these other ones I've done, they've actually come up pretty good. Now we've got this getting stuff done. Oh, there we go. So we've got the Don't want it to, there it goes. So we've got this getting stuff done. It's darker up the top than it is down at the bottom, and I can actually see in the light, probably not going to be able to see it on the camera, I don't think, but the top of my pencil actually has got a slightly darker wood than the bottom of the pencil, so that sort of thing really does affect the etching quality. So what I'd probably have to do next time is really look at the pencils and make sure I can actually see this side of my pencil, the top half of the pencil in fact has a darker wood than what the bottom half does. So I probably need to turn it just one more round and etched across that lighter side, and I would have got a perfect etching of that one across there, which is what has happened with this one. This is the Creative Juices that I did. You can see it has etched beautifully in there because it is on the light wood there. If I grab this other Creative Juices, so these are both exactly the same, but the problem, I don't know if the camera is actually going to pick it up because it is such a slight difference. This one that has got the darker engrave on it, it actually has a slightly darker wood tint on this than what this pencil does. So that really does actually play with that etching, but I'm still pretty happy with how both of those ones have etched up. This one I love. It's just such a simple font that I'm using. Let's see if it will focus. Come on. Nope, it wants to focus on me. Let me see if I can find something other than my hand. Alright, so I found something to put it on. Let's see if we can find it without it focusing on me. There we go. So I've done that one as the Soy and Shea, and that one has etched up absolutely beautifully. This particular font, it is just nice and simple, easy to read, and it always etches up really nicely on the pencil, so happy with that one. And then this one's also done up quite well as too, and it's on the darker wood grain of this one, and it says soap design. So because it is actually on that darker grain of the wood, it has come up with that slightly darker etch. So that is something to definitely consider when you are etching on neutral colors like this, is that the neutral color or the tone of color within the wood is going to affect how well it actually shows that engraving up. I have got some other pencils in mind which are actually grey, and I think because it's grey all over, you get a much more even etch. So I'm pretty happy with how all of these have turned out. Just a couple of things for me to keep in mind is to make sure that I'm etching so that we've got the same tone of wood all across it, so that we get the same tone of etch going across, and also not to use fonts that are just not good for going this small. So we're definitely going to be taking out that Pimp My Soap as an option to do on pencils unless I can find a simpler version of it. But otherwise I'm pretty happy with how they've come out. I will do a couple of other tests just to make sure that everything is working fine. But what we're going to do now is, because I'm really happy with the actual positioning of the words on the pencils, they pretty much have all gone center in that little flat area. I'm going to come up to my little folder and I'm going to say save as, and I'm going to come down to my xTool folder, and we're going to actually save this as the a pencil. It's going a little bit slow. Okay, so I'm going to save this as a pencil, and I'll call it pencil jig so we know it's there. I'm going to say save, and now that means that the next time I want to put my pencils into my jig, I can line them all up, pull up that file, and then just change the words and know that they're going to sit in the center of each of my pencils. So that is how I create and use the jig in the xTool M1 laser and blade cutting machine. Now if you do have other laser cutting machines, you can create jigs to go in those as well. And for the time that it takes to actually create them, if I wasn't creating the video, the original sort of design of this jig wouldn't have taken me that long at all, and in less than 30 minutes I would have had this jig made. And that's 30 minutes worth of time that I spent creating it is going to save me so much time in the future lining up those words on these pencils. So it's definitely worth creating these jigs. So I hope you have enjoyed coming along with me. For those of you that do have laser machines, I hope you have found this useful. If you did, why not leave me a thumbs up, any comments down below, and until the next video, I hope you have a good one, and I will see you then. Bye.